This conference also allows us to express our appreciation for the work that all of you do every day, keeping our stations on the air, navigating the continual blitz of technology changes, and helping us manage through emergency situations. You are such an integral part of everything that happens at a station, so thank you for all you do. Got choked up over that. We're delighted to be collaborating with our friends from Indiana, Kentucky, Michigan, and Pennsylvania to present today's conference, and we have more than 20 states represented amongst our attendees. I'd like to recognize Dave Arland, president of the IBA, who is here along with Michaela Melvin from the IBA, Chris Winkle, president of the Kentucky Broadcasters Association, and Scott Kaysen from the KBA, Dan Kelly, Director of Technology for the MAB, and Bill Zeiders, Director of Marketing for the PAB. These are great organizations, and we appreciate the opportunity to collaborate for the benefit of all of our members. And we welcome all of you who are members of these associations. A key element of this conference is our exhibitors showcase, and we're delighted to have 62 companies exhibiting from all over the country, including 12 attending our show for the first time. Our exhibitors contribute significantly to the success of MBMTC. Without their participation, we would be a much smaller and less interesting event. In these times of tight budgets and staffing, we want to make sure that our exhibitors feel their investment in our conference is worthwhile. And so during our break and over lunch today, please be sure to visit our exhibitors and thank them for their participation, which makes this conference possible year after year. You may have seen the great door prizes donated by some of our exhibitors. We gave away about half of the items during breakfast, and the drawing for the remaining items, including the Sony 55-inch 4K Ultra HD television, will be held just prior to our closing session back here in this room this afternoon. Be sure to drop your business card in the basket at the registration desk, and you must be present to win. So before we begin our program, I would like to acknowledge a few groups and individuals. First, our partnership with the SBE and SMPTE. We rely on the local SBE chapters and the SMPTE sections to help promote MBMTC to their members, and our great turnout today is a credit to their efforts. A list of the chapter chairs is included in your program. I also want to recognize our MBMTC 2024 sponsors, and first our presenting sponsor, Gates Air. Gates Air has been a strong supporter of this conference for many years as a sponsor, exhibitor, and presenter, and we're grateful for their support as the presenting sponsor of our conference today. Here to make a few remarks is Paul Barziza, Regional Sales Manager for Gates Air.
Thank you. I'm just going to mimic a lot of what Christine said. This show is important because it is one of the very few that focuses solely on technology. I participate in lots of statewide shows and lots of regional shows throughout the year, and many of those are sway very strongly towards general management, sales, promotions, what have you. And this is a specific show specifically for technology and technology professionals like yourselves. We at Gates Air are a technology company. We feel it's important to support this event because it encourages more engineers, more people in technology, and that advances the technology of our industry. And she mentioned it's an ever-changing industry, and those of you who have been in it for a while, and I recognize many of the faces here, and I know you've been at it for a while, you know that right now the industry is changing more than ever and faster than ever. So it's important that technology symposiums and conferences are supported and attended by yourselves. So it's very important for us at Gates Air to support this particular conference every year, and we're pleased to do it. Thank you all. I hope you have a great day. I hope you learn a lot.
I also want to acknowledge the other companies sponsoring MBMTC 2024. First, the sponsor of today's lunch, Nautel, which is a longtime supporter of this conference as a sponsor, exhibitor, presenter, and a member of our planning committee. Next, our thanks to Broadcast Depot and Tie-Line, who sponsored this morning's breakfast. We appreciate their sponsorship and participation as exhibitors. And our thanks to Comrex, which sponsored our welcome reception last night. I hope those of you who attended had a great time there. And we appreciate the support of Cartoni, Force Tech, Drakeway Enterprises, IHSE USA, the Telos Alliance, and Q, who also made today's conference possible. Let's have a round of applause for all of our sponsors. Thanks also to our program committee chaired by Blake Thompson. This group does a great job of developing the conference agenda and ensuring that the sessions focus on the most relevant issues facing our industry. Program committee members can be identified by the light blue ribbons on their name badges, and we hope you'll share your feedback about MBMTC with our committee members. We also encourage you to complete our online conference evaluation by scanning the QR code on your attendee packet. And finally, huge thanks to our OAB team, Andy Hartzell over there and Mariah West in the back taking pictures, for all of their hard work in coordinating today's conference. They've done a great job of organizing and executing the many details that go into an event like this. Thanks also to Joan McLean and Cindy Johnson, who are helping out at our registration desk today. So as we start our program, I want to express my appreciation to all of our presenters and panelists for their time and effort in preparing their presentations. We've got a great lineup of sessions, and I'm sure you'll have a tough time deciding which breakout session to attend. Not to worry, though. Thanks to the efforts of Casey Claxon and his team at Claxon Communications in the back, we are recording all of today's sessions, and we'll post them on the MBMTC website for later viewing. One quick housekeeping note for those of you who were here with us yesterday: don't forget to stop by the registration desk to pick up your parking pass. The parking pass that you received yesterday is single use only, and so you will need another one to get out of the garage today. So on to our opening session. Let me turn it over to our moderator for the panel, Dave Arland, president of the Indiana Broadcasters Association. Dave owns Arland Communications, a communications and association management firm that works for several groups, including the IBA. Dave and the IBA have been great partners for us, and we've appreciated the opportunity to collaborate with Dave on a number of projects, including today's conference. So Dave, thanks for all you do. Thank you.
Well, she didn't say it, but I think we owe a big round of applause to Chris for all of her help and all of her work to put this together. Chris, thank you so much. This is something of a swan song for Chris. As I think most of you know, she's announced that she's leaving the OAB after this year. So it's always good to go out on a high note. And I would note that this session is always our best attended. It's a little bit like church, you know, nobody comes down to the front. But that's okay. We appreciate the fact that you're here and that you've shown up to learn, and that's the whole purpose of today. So this morning's general session focuses on the wide range of legal and regulatory issues that radio and TV stations need to be aware of. And we have two parts for this session. The first is our panel of attorneys representing the 5 state associations hosting today's conference, and also the NAB itself. And then part 2 will be a conversation with a representative from the FCC. We're honored to have John Blumenschein from the Commission here with us today to discuss some issues that are pending with the FCC's Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau. And John also has a table out near registration, so he'll be here all day to answer your questions. We've got a lot of ground to cover, so let's get started with the panel discussion with our attorneys. And while their bios are in your programs, I do want to introduce them briefly to you, and then I'm going to get off the stage and let them share what they're doing. So first, on my left at the end is Patrick Cross. He is an attorney with the Brooks Pierce Law Firm, and he serves as regulatory counsel for the Ohio Association of Broadcasters. Patrick represents media and broadcasting companies and radio and TV stations on a wide range of issues related to FCC regulatory compliance, enforcement matters, programming, licensing, copyright, and other intellectual property matters. He never sleeps. Patrick has been practicing law since 2016 and clerked for 2 federal judges prior to joining Brooks Pierce's communications practice. Next to Patrick is Alison Martin. She is Vice President of Innovation and Strategy for the National Association of Broadcasters. She's from Washington. She's here to help you. In this capacity, Alison fosters partnerships through the Pilot Initiative that you're probably familiar with, part of NAB, that drives innovation in the broadcast industry. And she focuses particularly with Pilot on next-gen TV and artificial intelligence. Previously, she tackled global video policy at Meta, or Facebook, and served as Deputy Chief Technologist at the Federal Communications Commission. Alison combines legal and technical skills with both a law degree and an undergraduate degree in electrical and computer engineering. And later today, you can also ask her about ingress, and she'll tell you what that is, but not at this panel. Next to my immediate left is Dave Oxenford. He's a partner with Wilkinson, Barker, Knauer, LLP, who serves as regulatory counsel for the Indiana Broadcasters, the Michigan Association of Broadcasters, and the Kentucky Broadcasters Association. And Pennsylvania. He is a busy guy. This is your third Midwest city this week, right? He never sleeps, just like Patrick. David has represented broadcasters for more than 40 years with experience, and despite his youthful looks, in all areas of broadcast law, including FCC's multiple ownership limitations, the political broadcasting rules, EEO policy, advertising issues, and other programming matters, and FCC technical rules. In addition to representing a wide range of station groups, he represents a number of state associations, the Trade Association for Media Brokers, Program and Service Providers to the broadcast and digital media industry, as well as banks and others providing financing to media companies. So our panel is well equipped to address issues. This is always one of our most lively sessions, believe it or not, talking about regulatory issues. So I will turn it over to you guys, and you can tell us what's next.
Great. Thanks so much, Dave. Thank you all for showing up first thing in the morning. It's really great to start on a high note, right? When we tell you about all the regulatory things that are going on in Washington. At one of the states that I usually go to, they introduce the legal session as the one where fun goes to die. Hopefully we'll be a little bit better here this morning, although being that we're on camera and that we have the FCC in the third row here, I guess we have to kind of moderate what we say about some of these regulations. So don't expect me to say, boy, this is a dumb proposal, or how did this possibly come up? But that may slip out once or twice. In any event, we're going to go back and forth, talk about lots of different issues here in the next 50 minutes, or 45 minutes. Try to hit as many issues as possible, but we do want to take your questions too. So if you've got something as we're talking along about several of these issues, please jump up, throw out your question, and we'll do our best to answer, and certainly try to save a couple minutes at the end for general questions as well. I think the first thing that we've got to do is sort of set the stage. We know there's been lots of things coming out of the FCC in particular over the last year or two. We've seen lots of different regulatory changes that everybody needs to take into account. But one of the real issues is what's not going to happen in the past, but what's going to happen in the future. We want to talk about the future, right? We don't want to talk about what happened in the past. And that's going to be what happens in November. Because what happens in November may have some changes, may affect the regulatory climate in Washington. Once the presidential election is over, we see what happens at the FCC. Traditionally, when a president of a different party is elected, the chairperson of the FCC resigns. The president appoints an interim chair to run the FCC, to set the agenda, make the broad policy decisions about what the FCC will consider soon after the president is inaugurated, and then ultimately a permanent FCC chairperson will be nominated and approved by the Senate. Obviously, if former President Trump wins the election, we'll see a new FCC chair. Now, even if Vice President Harris wins the election, it's not certain whether Jessica Rosenworcel, the current chair of the FCC, will continue in place. Traditionally, most FCC chair people decide at the end of their first session, at the end of the first term of a presidential period, that they're going to go on to bigger and better things, whether it's to go into private industry, go someplace else in the government, go to some think tank, or just, go out on the street and figure out what they're going to do next in their life. But after 4 years, they're usually have had plenty of the FCC they're ready to move on to some other things. So that may well happen here with the Harris administration. There may be a new chairperson. We've been talking about that over the 2 sessions that I've had over the last 3 days in other states. And there's not a consensus, though, about whether that will happen here. Some thinking is that Jessica Rosenworcel, even though she's been the acting chair and then chairperson of the FCC since 2021, really didn't get a chance to implement her agenda until October, when she had a third Democratic commissioner. There were 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans up until October, and so she's really only had 5 or 6 months to, well, I guess now it's 10 months to implement her agenda. Boy, how time flies. And she's done a lot in 10 months, but there's some thought that she may want to stay on for a while longer and implement some other things. When do we find out? The rumors start flying the day after the election. All the trade press in Washington, all the rumor mills start talking about what's next for the FCC. And so start paying attention at that point so we can get an idea of where the direction of the FCC will go once the presidential election is over. Allison, you want to talk a little bit about Congress?
Sure. So the story in Congress is a little different from this. I mean, obviously, every single House seat is up for grabs, at least in theory, and about a third of the Senate seats are up for grabs. And so what does that mean for our legislative agenda on the Hill? On the one hand, it doesn't mean a whole lot. Almost all of our issues are incredibly bipartisan. That is thanks to the work that all of our members do in every single district in every single state of the country, being on the air, serving their communities. It makes it really easy. It makes the lobbying job incredibly easy on the Hill. On the other hand, you do have a totally new slate of staffers. In fact, even if people retain their seats, they often end up with new staffers. Not necessarily at the sort of highest committee levels. Sorry, should I move this closer? Not necessarily at the highest committee levels, but at the individual staffers. So that means re-educating every single one of them as to why this is important. And while it may not be hard to convince a middle-aged or older congressperson that AM radio is incredibly important, try explaining that to a 22-year-old staffer on the Hill. So it does take some effort. The other thing to keep in mind is that any bill that has been pending, even if it's been passed out of committee, and we'll get to that a little bit later, gets completely thrown out the window in January as the new Congress is seated. So that means that if we don't get some of our legislative priorities over the finish line, we do have to start from scratch. But it's not really from scratch because we can say, hey, this was incredibly bipartisan, it was popular in the last Congress, and we have the co-sponsors that we need on both sides, no matter who wins overall.
Perfect. And so I will talk briefly about how the current sort of judicial makeup and judicial philosophy has the ability to affect broadcast issues going forward. As you all know, sort of the way that agencies like the FCC gain their authority to take action is through Congress. Congress has to give them authority, the power to regulate in some particular way. As a check on that, because our whole system is based on checks and balances, right, in the way that we govern, the judiciary has the ability to come in after an agency makes a decision and see whether or not the agency stayed within the bounds of what Congress sort of asked them to do, what they allowed the agency to, what regulations the agency was allowed to promulgate. This past Supreme Court term, there were 2 incredibly significant decisions that came out that sort of overturned traditional concepts of the way that courts look at agency actions and those congressional delegations of authority. The first is a pair of cases called Loper-Bright versus Raimondo and Relentless Inc. Versus Department of Commerce. Those 2 decisions, you've probably heard this word bandied about, but there's this concept of Chevron deference that's been around for about 40 years now. And basically it was a court decision that said, if Congress doesn't legislate incredibly clearly, if they give you a general sort of authority, like with the FCC, the one that always springs to mind is to do something in the public interest. You might think what something would be in the public interest, and you would disagree. You would think it could be something else. So it's difficult to decide what exactly that terms mean, what that term means for purposes of regulation. We can disagree about that. Under Chevron deference, until about late June of this year, courts were required to defer to whatever the agency did. If a statute was ambiguous, if we couldn't really decide firmly one way or the other what the statute said, the court was supposed to say, is what the agency did kind of within the realm of reason? If so, we're going to uphold it. That principle has now gone out the window. The court overturned that doctrine and said, no, you know what, courts are supposed to be the final decision makers here. So we're not going to defer to the agency anymore. We're going to instead look at the statute and say, would we have reached the same decision that the agency did? Do we think that they got it right? Not whether or not could we get to a place where we think it's okay what they did. Which is a minor shift, admittedly, sort of in the way that you conceptualize it, but it could have big ramifications for the way that the FCC takes action in the future, especially on some of the big ticket policy issues we'll talk about here. For the purpose I expect for many of the people in this room in the technical sphere, it probably actually won't have too much of an impact. There's another type of judicial deference that existed before Chevron that may or may not come back to the forefront called Skidmore deference. But basically, whether or not you look at that or not, there's sort of a general judicial temperament to say on highly technical issues where the court really doesn't have any expertise, and the agency truly is the expert, right? The audio division staff and engineers really know that space really well. So the courts have said we're more likely to defer to what the agency decides to do on issues like that are highly technical. So in that sense, it may not have a tremendous effect for the technical matters, but for some of the bigger ticket policy issues, it may. And we'll talk in a little bit, we have major court challenges going on that will continue and that may raise those principles and sort of the change that we've seen in that Chevron and relentless recalibration. The other decision that I'll touch on incredibly briefly is a case that basically raises questions about, it was a case against the SEC and the way that they chose to impose a penalty for someone who had allegedly committed fraud under the Securities and Exchange Commission Act. But the Supreme Court decision said the agency can only do so much here before you have the ability to request a jury trial, that you have a right under our Constitution to say, agency can't decide this, I need to be tried by a jury of my peers. That has the potential to affect all of the FCC enforcement actions that you'll see. We've already seen this come out in some FCC decisions as well. There was a children's commercial time limit certification enforcement action recently where Commissioner Symington wrote separately and said, I can't sign on to this because we need to examine what the effect of the Supreme Court decision has on our enforcement authority and the way that we conduct enforcement actions. So that's sort of a pending question as to how that will be resolved with the FCC, but that's the other big ticket court item that we're going to see play out over the coming years in my mind.
Right, that is an important issue to watch because Commissioner Symington has said he doesn't think that the FCC's got the authority to issue fines at all without you first having the opportunity to go to a jury trial to determine whether a fine should be issued. I'm not sure I read the case the same way that he reads the case, because what the Supreme Court said is in cases where it looks like a normal court case, a case that would arise what they call at civil law. Normally you'd be in court for fraud, like this issue before the Securities and Exchange Commission where a guy was fined and the court said, no, it's fraud. That's something that's usually tried in court. He gets his day in court before a jury trial, before he gets fined. Normally if you're operating with excess power or at the wrong transmitter site, you don't end up in court. You end up getting fined by the FCC. So whether this really has an extension to the extent that the commissioner thinks it does or seems to think that it does, who knows? But he's saying that we ought to look at this authority, look at this Supreme Court decision, see if it's broader than it appears on its face before we issue any sort of fine. Also on the Chevron deference issue, I had a lot of people say, oh my gosh, all the FCC rules are going away. No, they're not. Probably, as Patrick said, minor differences in how it's going to change things, but we'll talk about some of the specifics going forward. Another kind of big picture item, though, that oversees a lot of technical operations, the opportunity for new stations in particular, major changes in stations, deals with FCC auction authority. Before a new FM can be authorized, before a new set of translators can be authorized, before a new window can be opened for LPTV filings or for TV translator filings, or a new window even for AM stations. We haven't had an AM window in almost 20 years now for new AMs, just in case anybody wants one, or to change channels, to build new AMs. All those require auction authority, because whenever you've got two or more people who file for the same frequency or file in a mutually exclusive way, where the two applications preclude each other, it's decided by an auction. FCC auction authority for about 2 years now has been on hold, because the Congress has got to reauthorize that every few years. And a question came up about government spectrum, including the needs of the military to use some of the spectrum, and whether spectrum can be repurposed for wireless purposes and other communications purposes. And Congress hasn't been able to get to a resolution on that for 2 years, so no broadcast auctions have taken place. And until that's authorized by Congress, and it doesn't seem like they're in a real hurry to do that. They keep saying, oh yeah, we'll get this in this bill or that bill, or we'll put a rider on one of the congressional budget bills to get this through Congress. It just hasn't happened. And so there's a whole bunch of new FM channels that are out there, including, I know some in Michigan, that aren't available to be auctioned off because there's no auction authority. A new translator window. I know lots of people have wondered about new translator windows to get translators for HD2 signals, or for AM stations that didn't get them in the windows a couple years ago. That's all on hold. TV translators, low power TVs, all on hold until the FCC has auction authority, and right now we don't know when that's going to happen. It also affects a proceeding on 12.7 gigahertz.
Yeah, and so in terms of a real practical effect right now, the broadcast auxiliary spectrum, especially for my TV folks, your remote pickups, STLs, TSLs, in the 12.7 to 13.25 gigahertz band, was part of an FCC rulemaking where they are looking at potentially repurposing that for 5G and potentially 6G deployments in the future. You may recall, if you have broadcast auxiliary in that spectrum, you had to file certifications by November of last year. And I'll actually do a quick little footnote here for my friends on the recording. We'll mention some deadlines, I expect, throughout the course of this presentation, but I would implore anyone who's listening on the recording to go and check the deadlines, because they can change. Even this afternoon, there could be a release, like the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau graciously extended the filing requirement deadline for the EAS Form 1. And that's something that literally just changed. So please check the deadlines we mentioned. But at any rate, so back to 12.7 gigahertz spectrum, you had to file certifications in November of last year. In that sense, it's very similar to the C-band transition that we went through. And it was verifying sort of the accuracy of the information that you have on your 12.7 licenses. And we're in a place now where the FCC has taken no further action in that proceeding because, as David said, we don't currently have, the FCC doesn't have spectrum auction authority to actually do anything if they decide to repurpose it. So it's in somewhat of a holding pattern, even though it had really been kind of teed up, and we had to act really quickly to get these certifications on file. So that's a very real-world practical effect that's being felt right now, and we won't know the resolution of that proceeding, I expect, until spectrum auction authority is restored.
Great. So let's run through a bunch of issues, quick hits on a whole bunch of issues. Allison?
Sure. I will start with the foreign sponsorship ID rules, which I hate that they are called foreign sponsorship ID because really they're sponsorship ID rules. So don't tune out if you're like, I don't air any foreign programming. That may be true, but you still have to follow these steps. So the FCC initially put rules into effect in 2022 that would require you to perform due diligence on anyone who leases airtime on your stations to determine whether or not they are an agent of a foreign government. These rules were partially vacated because the courts found that you couldn't be required to do all of those diligence steps that they put into place. If you are leasing airtime to a foreign agent, you do have to identify that with the appropriate on-air and public file notifications. The FCC tried again in 2020, this year in June. They adopted new rules that would require you at least to ask anyone who is leasing airtime if they are a foreign agent, and to record that answer in your public file, assuming they say no or if they decline to answer. If they do answer in the affirmative, you do have to run those disclosures on the air. Those rules are applied not only to what we think of as leases, of traditional leases, but they also apply to non-candidate ads, PAC ads, issue ads, things like that on your programming. This was a surprise when the FCC included those in the scope of the rules. Is it? Okay, sorry. Is this better? Okay, this was a surprise when the FCC included that in the rules, that you would have to include issue ads and non-candidate ads as part of this diligence requirement. NAB has filed an appeal a couple of weeks ago in the courts, but that appeal does not necessarily stay the effectiveness of the rule. The rule will go into effect once it is through the whole Paperwork Reduction Act process. Likely that's going to take at least until sometime in December. But the net result is that for anyone who leases airtime, including issue and candidate ads, you would need to ask them if they are a foreign entity and record that in your public file.
Right, that's going to affect PEP programs, NCSA programs for all the state associations too. So when you're leasing time to the Michigan Tourism Department, you're going to have to ask them whether they're a representative of a foreign government, which should be a very interesting question. Let's hope not.
Absolutely. Yeah, the Army National Guard is the one that I always use, which tickles me personally. So I'm going to touch incredibly briefly on the EEO Form 395B regulation. I'm sure you've already heard it a lot, and I think has probably minor relevance to the technical folks here, but just so you know really what's going on that front, the FCC reinstated a form that's been on ice for about 20 years. It's EEO Form 395B, and it requires station ownership groups, if your station employment unit has 5 or more full-time employees, once a year to file information with the FCC regarding the workforce demographics of your overall workforce. So it requires identification of everybody who's part of your workforce, the job classification they fall into, gender, race, ethnicity. And so this had been a long sort of pending proceeding at the FCC. There had been judicial decisions that had questioned the FCC's authority to make it public versus not public. To sort of cut through all the clutter for you all, the sort of the high level thing to understand is that it was supposed to be due by September 30th of this year. The FCC decided not to require broadcasters to file it by September 30th, in part because we don't have a form yet. They haven't finally approved a new version of the form. We don't know exactly when the first filing deadline will fall, in part because it is subject to court challenges right now in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. Those won't be resolved, I wouldn't expect, until next year. The FCC just filed its responsive brief, but there's still one more chance for briefing coming up, and then you'll potentially have oral argument as well, and then the court has to make a decision on whether or not what the FCC did was valid. And this goes to our earlier talk about Chevron, right, and how that sort of plays into that litigation, if at all. That's a question that's being raised there. And then separately, there are petitions for reconsideration and stay requests at the FCC as well right now. So the ultimate resolution of all of those will sort of determine where we end up on that question. But as of right now, you don't have to take any action, but we're going to be hearing things over the coming months as the new form is approved and sort of the steps you might need to take. You might get surveys from your ownership group asking you to, list your job classification, classify yourself into certain categories. That's a whole employment law question that I will defer from, but that's the status of 395B.
Another proceeding where you guys may get involved and where you may have to make technical decisions that right now Google, Meta, and all the big tech companies can't do is AI and political advertising. The FCC was worried that suddenly during this election we'd see all sorts of deep fakes on the air attacking candidates, putting words in their mouth with computer-generated images of those candidates saying something that they didn't say or doing something that they didn't do. So the FCC put their hands in the air and said, we got to do something. And so they put out a notice of proposed rulemaking where they're taking comments about whether you guys need to make sure that there is an identification when AI is used on the ad, identifying every time AI has been used to generate a political ad. Unfortunately, the way that they've defined in the proposal AI, it's basically anytime a computer touches an audio or video ad, it's AI, which is incredibly broad since Computers touch virtually every ad at this point. I think the FCC realizes that's going to have to be narrowed. In fact, the chairwoman just said something the other day about that. But what they have asked is basically that you guys go out when you sell an ad, ask the sponsor whether they used AI in the generation of their ads. Okay, that's doable, right? But then they said, but if somebody challenges that, if the sponsor says, oh no, I didn't use any AI, and somebody who's being attacked in the ad says, that's a fake news, I didn't do that, put the burden on you to figure out whether or not that ad should be labeled. Now, there is no technology, especially on the audio side at all, to figure out whether AI is being used. On the video side, there are ways to look at it. I'm told that usually 50 or 60% of the time that they use it, it turns out that the AI has been misidentified, usually identifying stuff that hasn't used AI as using AI. So I can't see how the FCC will put the burden on you guys to do that, but that is a question that's being asked. This proceeding reply comments are due next week. The decision is likely not going to come until sometime next year, if at all. This may be one of those questions where the FCC realizes, hey, the real people that we should be regulating are the advertisers. We don't have jurisdiction over the advertisers. Put the rules on them to make sure that they're labeling their stuff, not putting on you when you can't figure that out yourself, certainly not in a timely basis in the middle of a political election. So watch how that comes out.
Yeah. And so I'll turn it over to EAS now, which is we've had a 3-2 divided FCC that has, been starkly, contrasted in decisions. You've had a lot of really split decisions. One area where we have not seen a lot of disagreement, we've seen a lot of unanimity among the commissioners, is on public safety and EAS issues in particular. So there have been some sort of big ticket items that have come out through the EAS rulemakings that have been out there. The first one for you all that has a real, actual, tangible deadline that will fall next year in September 2025 is that the FCC has adopted a new missing and endangered persons alert code. This is designed to sort of fill in the gap between Amber Alerts for, sort of minors and figuring out if we can get communities to go and look and help in figuring out when there are missing children and in missing sort of senior level people. And so silver alerts. And so in between that is sort of what this missing and endangered person alert code is designed to encompass. It's designed to allow alerting to encompass additional missing persons in that age classification. The FCC adopted the rule, except the rule is not going to take effect until September 2025 for your purposes to allow the EAS hardware and software manufacturers to get software updates and hardware updates necessary to carry the new codes. You're welcome to update your equipment before the deadline. The FCC has encouraged it, but know that by September 2025, as of right now, that is the date by which you need to be in compliance with the new missing and endangered person alert code, at least insofar as your hardware and software has the functionality to carry it. It's still a voluntary alert, so it'll be up to your station's discretion whether or not you want to carry it. So that's sort of the first tangible item that you have. A pending rulemaking that is out there that has the potential to have a significant impact on you all going forward is an FCC proposal to require all of you to report in the Disaster Information Reporting System and maybe the National Outage Reporting System, DEERS and NORS. So DEERS was something that came online back in 2007 in the wake of Hurricane Katrina, and is designed to give the FCC sort of operational readiness information regarding broadcast infrastructure, wireless infrastructure, wireline infrastructure in times of emergency. Who's online, who's not. And so the idea being that we can use that data, harness that data to provide better emergency coverage in times of crisis. National Outage Reporting System is a little bit different. That's just whenever you have a severe service drop for an extended period of time. And so that's not necessarily tied to emergencies, but it's the same general principle of we want to know when our communications infrastructure is being hampered. The sort of the high-level thing you need to understand is that it's been voluntary for broadcasters, still is voluntary for broadcasters. Disaster Information Reporting System is, and so is NORS. but the FCC would mandate this under the current proposal. They took comments on it. The broadcast industry, I think, has been mostly opposed to it, not because of any quibble with the public safety aspect of it, but more just sort of, and I can speak personally to this, I'm from North Carolina, and so in western North Carolina right now, there are stations who are really just fighting for their lives right now. They're trying to get water and other things, completely sort of unrelated to the core broadcast operations, and can't even visit transmitter sites because roads are closed, and so they don't know if their translators are online. They don't know where they've lost power, where they haven't. And so I think the concern from the broadcast industry is to require those types of individuals to go and file these reports under potential penalty of fines if you don't do it every 24 hours, when you may not even have wireless coverage to do that, or a way to get internet and file those reports, is a difficult lift, and is sort of, it could potentially be viewed as at odds with sort of the idea that these stations are doing everything they can right now to serve their communities, and to get news and reporting and information out. So to require a break in that coverage to instead go to file these reports could be viewed as not the best allocation of resources. But that's a debate that's going on in the proceeding right now, and we'll see how that shakes out. No resolution on that yet. And then the final thing on EAS that I will hit is there's a long pending sort of cybersecurity set of proposals that would require all stations to adopt sort of robust cybersecurity plans that discuss the sort of the operational characteristics of your EAS infrastructure, and sort of not just, do we have passwords for our EAS software, but what do we do at end of life cycle for equipment? Do we have two-factor authentication? Like a sort of robust planning around the operational components of your EAS and how you're going to keep it secure. Another component of that rulemaking is that as things currently stand, you have 60 days if your EAS equipment goes out to continue operating without any further authority from the Commission. After 60 days, you're supposed to go to the field office and request informal authority to continue operating, and explain, hey, look, our EAS equipment went down. This is what we're trying to do to get it fixed. What this proposal would do as part of this rulemaking would change that to a 24-hour deadline. So within 24 hours of the equipment going out, you would have to notify the FCC. So it would be a really substantial shift in the way that you all probably treat EAS equipment failures right now, and the way you process those things. So we don't know if any of those proposals are going to be adopted. There's still rulemakings that have been pending for 2 years or so right now, but that's something to be watching on the EAS front as well.
Right, and it would also require you to certify to the FCC what your cybersecurity program is on a yearly basis. What they'll do with that information, I'm not sure, but that's the proposal. Our understanding, I think, Allison, you probably have heard this, that the item is on circulation and may be out relatively soon, so watch for that. Another proceeding to watch is the FCC's ownership proceeding, because it's always important to see who your boss is going to be the day after tomorrow, right? The FCC, as some of you may remember, the day after Christmas gave broadcasters a Christmas present by deciding not to change the radio ownership rules, not to loosen the TV ownership rules, and in fact to tighten them in some ways. Those deciding that really broadcasters just compete against broadcasters. All that digital competition out there, that's not really competition. We don't have to change the ownership rules to deal with that digital competition. That decision is on appeal. The NAB has appealed. I represent a group of radio broadcasters that have appealed. There's a group of TV broadcasters that have appealed, that have suggested that these rules need to be relaxed so that broadcasters can get bigger to compete against digital competition that's in every marketplace across the country. The FCC we filed our briefs in June. The FCC last week filed their opposition briefs. We file a reply brief October 15th. Oral argument early next year, probably a decision about summertime of 2025. This decision can also be affected by who the new chairperson of the FCC is, as it will be very political, so watch as the ownership rules may be changing.
Okay. And moving on to the radio-specific issues, and I'm going to start with the AM for Every Vehicle Act, which I had alluded to earlier in my remarks about Congress. So this is an act that has been introduced with co-sponsors. It's very bipartisan. It's bicameral. The lead co-sponsors include Senator Markey from Massachusetts and Senator Cruz from Texas. So this gives you an idea. I'm not sure there's any other bill that has ever been introduced with both of them as co-sponsors on it. So this would require the Department of Transportation to issue rules regarding AM radio in cars, so that all cars would have AM radio and all cars would have that accessible, easily accessible to the driver. Hurricane Helene is a great example of why this is really important. It's not just so that you can listen to the quality programming that the AM radio stations air every day, but in an emergency, oftentimes those AM radio stations in general, but specifically AM stations, are going to be your only source of news in a disaster because the power is out, the cell networks are out, and all you have is that radio in your car as your primary way of getting that information. So it has 264 co-sponsors in the House, which is more than half. It has 62 co-sponsors in the Senate, which is a filibuster-proof majority. You would think that that means that this is an automatic win this term. It is passed out of committee in both of the chambers. However, the way that it works, it needs to hitch a ride on something that is going to pass. We're basically out of legislative days before the election. There will be a lame duck session after the election and before the new Congress is seated in January. Our hope is that with this kind of bipartisan support in both chambers that we will be able to get this through by the end of the year. If we don't, we'll have to reintroduce it in the next Congress. Again, with this many co-sponsors from both parties, this is not at all a partisan issue. We think we have good chances in the next term if it comes to that, but hopefully we can actually get it through the finish line this year.
Great. Another technical issue is the proposal for a new Class A10 FM station. Right now, FMs or Class A stations are limited to 6 kilowatts in power. The proposal is to adopt a new class nationwide that would allow Class A stations to go to 10 kilowatts. This is to substitute for the long pending proposal for a C3 station that would only be limited to the C zone for FMs. This is just a proposal. The FCC has taken very initial comments on it. Still has to go through a formal notice of proposed rulemaking. We're looking 2 years down the road before there's any relief at a minimum for Class A stations to go to higher power levels. So don't start buying your transmitters now.
And speaking of potential increased power levels, we do have an FCC decision that just came out. That's one half of sort of a proposal that had been teed up by NAB and others, asking to allow, number one, increased digital power for digital FM stations, and number two, to deploy asymmetric sidebands. So with the carrier signal in the middle, as the rules currently stand, you have to have equal sidebands in terms of power level. So what the proposal there and what just adopted will allow is for you to flip one sideband to be a higher power than the other if you'd like. If you think that on one side of the frequency spectrum you have the ability to leverage a higher power level to get a little bit more pop count out of it. So that was just adopted. It'll be a little while until you're actually able to implement that change because it has to go through, Alison alluded to earlier, Paperwork Reduction Act. Whenever there's a new form involved, and this will require you providing notice to the FCC, there's a whole set of extra regulatory approvals that it has to go through to make sure that everything is okay on the form and that it's okay and passes muster under sort of congressional directives on that front. The other component of that asymmetric sideband proposal that I just discussed is an overall digital, an increase to the permissible power levels for FM digital stations. The power level sort of formula that's been in place for many, many years is sort of due for a revamp in the eyes of the folks who filed the petition. And the FCC has mostly agreed. The problem that we have encountered as it's gone through that proceeding is that at the very top of the FM band, you've had concern from the aviation industry that increased power levels might interfere with air navigation up there. I don't think, and Alison, you can probably speak better to this than me, but I don't think that that's going to be an insurmountable obstacle, but it is something that NAB has been working with them on to try and massage that forward. So the FCC said, well, let's go ahead and take the asymmetric proposal, approve that, because we know that that's okay, and we'll continue to work on the FM digital overall power increase. Does that? Okay. And so then the other component of this is the FCC resuscitated a rule that was deregulated not too long ago during the Chairman Pai administration that prohibits duplication of FM signals in a particular market. You are not allowed to have 25% programming overlap averaged across a week when principal signal contours for your FM facilities, whether or not you own the stations or if they're brokered, if they overlap by 50%. That was recently adopted. It's taken effect, and so you have until February of 2025 to come into compliance if you have concerns that your FM facilities are running afoul of this prohibition. I have not yet encountered a station that has been. I've had some close calls, but I haven't had anyone that is actually in violation of that prohibition. But to the extent that you have same market FMs, let this just be a little ticker in your mind to say, maybe I should examine those signal overlaps and just see if they're duplicating programming, if we're going to run afoul of that.
Right, we've got 7 minutes, so we need to just pick things up to get some questions in as well. Another FM issue that's out there is geo broadcast solutions, zone casting or geocasting, allowing you to use boosters to originate up to 3 minutes of independent programming in different parts of your market. You put a booster in the southern part of your market that does one car commercial, booster in the northern part of your market that does a different commercial at the same time. That's in effect. Stations all across the country are beginning to use that. There are some concerns about interference. We'll see how that plays out as time goes on.
Hitting these quickly, the AM pre-sunrise and post-sunrise authority is now available again. It had been frozen since 2007 due to a computer glitch, and now that computer glitch has been resolved. So you can request authority again from the audio division. So to the extent you are currently operating with post-sunset or pre-sunrise authority, go ahead and email the audio division just to check and make sure that you don't need a new authorization.
Okay, and moving on to TV issues really quickly. So the Future of TV initiative is an initiative that was launched about a year ago in order to address a lot of the issues regarding the transition to next-gen TV. This was announced by the chairwoman of the FCC at the NAB show in 2023, and it includes stakeholders from the MVPD industries, from the consumer electronics industry, from public interest organizations. It includes the handful of broadcasters who are kind of opposed to transitioning to next-gen TV, as well as the overwhelming majority of broadcasters who are eager to transition to next-gen TV. We expect the report to be circulated to full membership this week and to get out to the public, depending on comments and feedback, within the next probably month. But this will help narrow the scope of issues. This won't be the silver bullet to get us over the finish line, to get us to be able to sunset the simulcasting requirement, which is the ultimate goal. But it will at least help give the FCC what it needs to move forward on that.
Another proceeding pending at the FCC deals with low-power TV and TV translators. The FCC is looking at adopting a whole set of new rules, including limiting minor change applications to a 30-mile radius, including new public inspection file obligations for low-power TV stations. Also looking at possibly requiring there to be city of license coverage requirements for low-power TV and TV translators. Watch how these play out. A lot of questions have been raised about why are these rules even necessary? Isn't everything going okay as it is? We'll see where that goes. The other important thing for low-power TV and TV translators is there is a window right now where you can change channels to a different channel if that's been frozen for 12 years during the digital transition. If you've got interference or can get to a higher power level at a different channel, you've got an opportunity to change channels. There's windows open right now on a first-come, first-served basis.
And I'll quickly hit this last point here, and then I think probably we'll open it up for questions. But the final thing to be aware of for my TV folks is the pending expiration of the waiver that's been in place for you all to be required to audio describe non-textual, non-news information, emergency information. And so this is really just like describing weather radar and maps that you see when there's emergency coverage going on. It's sometimes known as the audible crawl rule. Basically, there's a waiver that's been in effect since around 2015 when the rules were initially adopted, because nobody's been able to come up with the technology to automate that process, to be able to have that automatically done. That's going to expire November 26th. I don't know whether or not another waiver request is possible. The last time the FCC granted the waiver, they seemed not necessarily inclined to grant another one. But what this may mean for you all as a technical operational perspective is that come November 26th, you may have some calls from your bosses saying, hey, what do we do to comply with this? How are we going to implement sort of technical capability to orally describe on your secondary audio programming channel all of the non-textual emergency non-news information that appears on the screen?
Great. Questions? We've got a couple minutes for questions. Yeah.
No, so that's a great question, and that was one that I cut in the interest of time. But so, I mean, I think that the comments in the record have really sort of so far been saying we're not necessarily opposed to the idea, but we just don't know how we're going to do it. The amount of space it's going to take up on devices to do 13 languages in audio alerts, and that's going to be a really tough lift. So I think, if I'm remembering correctly, for the most part, the EAS equipment manufacturers said, let's treat this more as sort of the initial phase of an FCC rulemaking, what would be known as a notice of inquiry, instead of like a formal proposal that, hey, we have rules that we're ready to adopt. If you all agree with them or disagree with them, let us know. And we're sort of more like exploring, this would be a great idea. How do we get there? Oh, great. Okay. Well, you just did.
Don't tell the FCC.
Yeah, right.
I don't think so. I mean, I think if everything's operated out of the same studio, the main studio, because it's only 3 minutes of programming that's originated in the zone casting, and it's within the same service area as the main station. So as long as the main station puts its EAS alerts out on all of its boosters at the same time, I don't think that the boosters themselves would need to have EAS equipment. But that's, I'm just saying that off the top of my head. We'd have to look at that in more detail. Other questions? Yeah.
Good morning. Next Gen TV, ATSC 3. What do we have to do to get rid of encryption? Because that's a problem. We are public broadcasters, and now we're being told we have to, in some cases by our networks, that we have to encrypt and be over the air. And there are not a lot of tuners that support it, and even the ones that do don't do it very well. I personally feel it's really harboring the adoption of ATSC 3. ATSC 1 had potential to do encryption, but it was never done. I just see this as a real holdback for the adoption of ATSC 3 is the encryption. Anything about eliminating that or anything like that?
So, I mean, ultimately, it's up to the broadcaster and their contract with the network to decide whether or not they're going to encrypt. The devices, with the exception of, I believe, one device out there, the devices do handle the encryption in ATSC 3.0. It's just a matter of that one device manufacturer. But I take your point, and that's an interesting perspective. We've been hearing primarily from broadcasters who want the flexibility to be able to encrypt. I would love to follow up on the idea that maybe that's not a universally held belief.
I would actually dispute that there are devices, a preponderance of devices that don't decrypt. 14 million have been sold. The one that will be given away today, a Sony Next Gen TV, properly decrypts. So encryption is a reality with ATSC 3. That's part of what the broadcast industry wanted to do. So it's happening. So you got to plan for it. And by the way, is to protect your signal from, being stolen. Unfortunately, there's been several examples where people have brought in digital TV signals, put them on the internet, and charged for it without permission. So that's what encryption is designed to stop. Not home recording. Home recording is still possible. So there's a lot of misinformation about that issue. All right, let's thank our panel and bring up John. Lots of issues. So Chris Merritt and I are chairs of the EAS committee of the National Alliance of State Broadcaster Associations, which works to keep our state associations updated on EAS-related developments. And one of our priorities has been to improve the lines of communication with the FCC's Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau. And over the summer, Chris and I went to Washington. We had the opportunity to meet in person with the Bureau staff and public safety. And we discussed a variety of issues, including state EAS plans, which are now required to be submitted online, as everybody in this room knows, to the FCC, and also updated on an annual basis, as well as the result of the October 2023 National EAS test. It happened about a year ago. And during our meeting, we suggested it would be great to have an FCC staff person participate in some of our state association events. And so we're delighted that the commission was receptive to this idea, and very pleased that John Blumenschein is with us this morning to discuss some of the FCC's priorities to ensure that our nation's communications networks are secure, particularly in times of emergency. John is an attorney advisor in the Cybersecurity and Communications Reliability Division of the FCC's Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau. He has more than a decade of experience in the federal government in national security, cybersecurity, legal compliance, and more. His previous roles include positions at the Department of Justice's National Security Division and the FBI's Office of General Counsel. He's not allowed to tell you about any of this, but that's where he's been. And it's a great pleasure to welcome him here for a little conversation. So I've got a few questions to ask of John, and you guys may have questions as well. So John, let's start with the EAS test from last October. Tell us about the results of that and any areas of future improvement that the commission has identified.
Thanks, Dave, and thank you, Christine. And before I answer this, I want to thank everyone here today for joining our conversation regarding emergency alerting. We at the commission, and particularly in the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, appreciate the vital role that broadcasters play in keeping their communities informed during emergencies. Particularly now we're seeing that play out. Whether it's providing news or delivering emergency alerts with information on severe weather, evacuation routes, shelters, and other critical messages, you're truly a lifeline for the public during our most trying times. We know that broadcasters often go to heroic lengths to remain on air during crises. So of course we want to do everything we can to support broadcasters like you to ensure you stay on air and continuing your invaluable role. Now turning to the results of the 2023 nationwide EAS test conducted by the Federal Emergency Management Association, FEMA, in partnership with the Commission. This test demonstrated an overall improvement in the operational effectiveness of the EAS across the United States. The results showed significant progress compared to the 2021 test, with 96.6% of EAS participants successfully receiving test alerts, up from 89.3% in 2021. The retransmission success rate also improved, rising from 87.1% in 2021 to 93.6% in 2023. The numbers were actually even higher for many of the states represented here today. For instance, Indiana had a 97.7% retransmission rate. Michigan had a 96.3% retransmission rate, and Ohio had a 95.8% retransmission rate. So these are great numbers, and they're a credit to the vast majority of broadcasters who recognize the importance of EAS in protecting the public during emergencies, and who keep their EAS systems in good working order. The increase in performance since 2021 can also partly be attributed to the test alert being initiated using the Common Alerting Protocol CAP which provided additional resilience and ensured broader delivery, especially through internet-based systems. Despite these improvements, several challenges and areas for future enhancement were highlighted. We note one major issue was related to outdated equipment. Around 23% of EAS participants were operating equipment with either outdated software, and that was approximately 17%, or equipment that was no longer supported with regular software updates, showing around 6%. The performance of these outdated systems lagged behind those that were fully updated. In addition to outdated equipment, some failures were also caused by equipment misconfiguration and obsolete software. This emphasizes the need for EAS participants to regularly update both hardware and software to maintain operational readiness and improve system reliability. Looking forward, the Commission recommends that EAS participants address the identified equipment issues by ensuring their systems are regularly updated with the latest software patches, or replaced if necessary to meet modern standards. This will not only improve alert reception and retransmission rates, but also mitigate security vulnerabilities. Additionally, we encourage participants, particularly in remote and U.S. Regional territories, to develop and maintain more robust operational readiness plans to enhance overall system performance.
So obviously the people in this room are the people who probably are in the 97, 95%, you know, whatever. So being specific for a moment, how do we get to 100%? I think that's what we worry about. So I'll use my state as an example. It's great that we're at 97% in Indiana, but that means 3% of our broadcasters, you know, have a problem. It sounds like most of those problems relate to outdated equipment, right? Or I've got the wrong software running. So I presume it's a diligence thing that you need to make sure you've got Ed's new equipment or you know, brand new software. So how did you gauge that? Is that based on the Form 1 and the other forms that are filed to say this is, you know, we've got deficiencies here? And what could we do to make sure we get to 100%?
Sure, absolutely. And yes, the Form 1 is invaluable in terms of, you know, in terms of compliance, in terms of ensuring that we have the data we need and the rates to be able to look over and ensure that we do reach 100%. As you noted, regular software and equipment updates are a key part of this. One of these key takeaways, again, was that equipment using outdated software, no longer updating software, had lower success rates for both receiving and transmitting alerts. You know, this is something that, you know, regularly updating EAS equipment with the latest software patches provided by manufacturers, ensuring that systems are optimized for both performance and security, as outdated systems are also vulnerable to cyber threats as well, and monitor manufacturer announcements regarding the end of support for certain equipment and plan for timely replacement when necessary. Making the most out of tests, you know, using the required monthly, weekly EAS tests as an opportunity to resolve any issues with systems. These tests provide an opportunity to ensure that all components of the EAS chain from signal reception to alert retransmission are functioning as expected under real-world conditions. This can be used to learn these mandated tests to verify that systems can handle a wide range of alert types and troubleshoot any potential issues that may arise during emergency alerts. Maintaining redundancy and monitoring sources. You know, this is a requirement by the Commission to monitor at least 2 sources for alerts, but it should also be considered monitoring additional sources to build redundancy into systems. This redundancy ensures that if one alert system fails due to equipment malfunction, internet outages, or other disruptions, there are alternative channels available to receive and retransmit alerts. The 2023 results demonstrated that multiple monitoring sources help to minimize disruptions, particularly in the regions far from primary entry points. primary entry point stations or in areas with unreliable infrastructure. If an EAS participant is unable to receive an alert from a specific source, should tell the SECC so the issue can be investigated and monitoring assignment can be changed.
I want to just underscore that point because I was actually going to make that same point on behalf of Chris in Ohio, Chris in Kentucky, Casey in Michigan, our folks in Pennsylvania. If you I've heard this last night actually, one of my stations said, you know, I've had trouble with the monitoring assignment. So you need to let us and your state emergency communications people know that. I know we've got ABIP inspectors in the room as well, and if they come to your station and you've got an issue, you got to let us know that because we're not from the government. We want to help you, but we want to make sure that when you report to the government, you have everything lined up. So it's important to keep those lines of communication open.
Absolutely, and the engagement we were involved with over the summer, getting this type of feedback is important for us, especially with the State Emergency Communication Committee and, staying informed with local emergency protocols and participating in regional tests and training exercises.
We didn't necessarily, John, talk to you about the EAS plans, but that is something that's the reason that Chris and I actually went to the commission was because we're a little frustrated that, in my case, my Indiana plan had not yet been approved. It has since been approved, but trying to get all of those done, and that has to be done every year. And hopefully it's, one and done, and then you're just making updates and approvals to it. So also very, very important. Let me switch gears. Recently, the commission adopted a new EAS event code for missing and endangered persons. And I was hoping you could kind of explain where that came from.
And that was discussed earlier regarding missing and endangered persons. This rule was adopted in August 2024. It aims to enhance public safety, allowing authorities to issue alerts for all individuals who are missing and at risk, but who do not meet the criteria for Amber Alerts, which are limited to minors who are reasonably believed to be abducted and in imminent danger of serious bodily injury or death. The MEP, Missing and Endangered Person Code, is intended as a dedicated EAS event code that alert originators can send a range of alerts to missing adults or children, including a variety of existing national, state, local, tribal alerts such as silver alerts, as you mentioned, for the elderly, Ashanti alerts, which notify the public about missing adults who are endangered or abducted, or feather alerts, which some states use for missing Native Americans. Before the adoption of the new MEP code, alert originators sent alerts such as using a variety of existing EAS codes that didn't correspond to the nature of a missing person's emergency, such as the local area emergency code. A dedicated MEP code will ensure that such alerts are clearly identified by EAS participants, systems, transmitted as needed to help identify missing persons. The Commission has set a 12-month implementation timeline until the rule's effective date, so September 2025. As noted in the earlier discussion, this is voluntary, but with this 12-month implementation period, this is giving broadcasters, emergency authorities, and other stakeholders time to update their systems and train personnel to effectively use the new event code.
I think there's kind of two ways to look at this. The first way, a lot of us when we heard this was like, oh my God, here we go again. It's the last thing we need. But on the other hand, I've also heard it said, maybe this MEP, the Missing Event Persons Code, might be the future. And so, it's a voluntary thing. It is a delicate matter to use EAS for a missing person. And I think that the missing ingredient here, we don't have the state police sitting here, or whoever in your state is responsible for Amber Alerts and other missing person alerts. I know one of our concerns was at any given time in my state, which is just west of here, our state police are looking for 2,000 people. So we certainly don't want to have 2,000 MEP alerts, but maybe this is a way in the future. And as you point out, John, the first step is just to make sure your equipment works properly and can recognize that code.
And that's oftentimes the case in these instances, you know, identifying an issue as you described, you know, going from here and then seeing what the next steps are based upon how this has been going since its implementation.
So my last question is really just about the future. Next Gen TV was brought up. It has some capabilities with alerting that are kind of interesting and cool, where you could be very specific by zip code on television in terms of alerts. But are there other alerting things that are in the hopper that are coming from the commission?
Sure, and I think this was touched upon, the multilingual EAS and WIA enhancements. The commission is making progress toward ensuring that all communities, including with people with limited English proficiency, have access to timely and accurate emergency alerts. The commission has adopted rules requiring wireless providers participating in WIA to support multilingual alert templates. Additionally, the commission has opened a rulemaking to explore whether and how similar multilingual templates should be implemented for EAS. These initiatives are increasingly important given the diverse linguistic demographics in the U.S. and aim to ensure that communities can receive critical information during an emergency. CISRIC's new focus on emerging technology, for those familiar, the Communication Security, Reliability, and Interoperability Council, CISRIC, which is a federal advisory committee managed by the commission, has established working groups focused on leveraging artificial intelligence and machine learning to enhance confidentiality, integrity, and availability of communications networks. These advancements could significantly impact the future of learning systems by enhancing the reliability and security of communications infrastructure. CISRIC's recommendations are expected to shape how learning systems adapt to new recommendations, new technologies while maintaining their core mission of public safety. And as was mentioned earlier, I want to repeat again with the ETRS Form 1, we have extended the deadline to October 18th to reduce the burden to EAS participants that are recovering from damage caused by Hurricane Helena. This extension applies nationwide, and we touched upon this earlier. This form is a vital part of the Commission's oversight. It helps us gather information about EAS participants' equipment, operational readiness for future nationwide tests. Completing this form ensures compliance with EAS rules and prepares participants for potential activities during emergencies, ensures that all aspects of EAS participants' alerting systems, from signal reception to receipt by the public, are fully operational. So,
Who in this room has filed their Form 1? See, we have people who follow the rules, who come to these conferences.
well, that's great to see, and
It's good to see,
you
and
know,
thank you for extending it, given the situation, particularly in North Carolina. We have time for maybe one or two questions from the audience. Anybody have a question? This is it. Yes, sir, in the back. Stand up and be loud.
Yeah, I don't know how you guys at that. I always want to ask the FCC this. Given new TVs, I assume somebody in this room bought a new TV in the past 5 years. We're giving away one. Any way to make TV manufacturers make it easier to get over the air? I just bought a TV for the station, matter of fact. It is literally buried in menus to find over-the-air TV. There's a button that says live. It does not take you to live TV. It takes you to
No, and I understand. I mean, I will note, first of all, that this is sort of outside of my scope, if you will, from the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau in terms of the rulemaking I'm engaged with. That said, I went through something. Well, I went through something similar over the summer, replacing a TV at our home so that the kids can watch Netflix and whatever they want. And, you know, pardon?
I said, because that's the second question here. Is there any way to make streaming channels have to comply with EAS?
Yeah, that is really.
We didn't say anything about it. Well, you just streamed.
That will be a question that I would have to get back to you on. Let's just put it that way. That is there are a multitude of issues there, and you know, I think we are at the commission, as noted and was discussed earlier. We are engaged in several NPR.
EAS enforces it to broadcast.
Yeah.
It's a good point, and the cable industry has said, "Oh my God, you know, we can't do that." But there have been upstart companies that have done that have put EAS alerts on top of streamed programming. So I would think that's a future interest, particularly in the shifting move in the way that people get content. It's a good frustration. I have the same frustration with the Toyota. Anytime I rent a Camry, I can't find the damn radio button just to listen to over-the-air radio. It's got one knob. You know, it doesn't even have a tuning knob. So, yeah. Okay, one more question. Yes, sir. Right next to you.
When I was updating our EAS equipment, I was really surprised to find out that the update software was like $500. Is that possibly one of the reasons why some of the stations aren't keeping their software updated? Because some stations are operating on shoestring budgets.
Absolutely, and you know, I mean, that was something that we had noticed, and some of the one of the suggestions that we would recommend is that, you know, this, I mean, there is a cost here, so planning for equipment replacement, I mean, this is something that needs to be taken into consideration. Again, we're hearing you in terms of the shoestring budgets. We are reading the comments, we are talking to the field, we understand this. That said, you know, there is an issue of compliance and factoring in that certainly, yes, could be a consideration in terms of some of the folks or some of the broadcasters failing to comport with that requirement.
It's sort of a double-edged sword. You know, on the one hand, it reminds me of when Microsoft switched to doing subscriptions instead of just buying the content. Or frankly, a lot of people, you know, they no longer buy Blu-rays. They just stream everything, and you got to pay a monthly fee. So on the one hand, the commission hands down new requirements like languages, and that's a software update, and that's an expense. So it's good to hear, John, that you understand that there is an expense involved. It's not that we're laggards, but you know, it's something that's got to be planned for, which I guess is your message.
Yes,
you know.
exactly. That this is something, you know, it has to be taken into consideration.
All right, you guys have great questions. We appreciate, John, you participating in our conference today. We're going to take a break and go to the exhibit hall, thanks to Telos for their sponsorship of the break. So we encourage you to get more coffee. And I do have one programming note that the session that will begin at 10:40 a.m., we have had a change. So the Keeping Your Station Compliant session has been replaced with Harnessing the Power of Web RTC. And that will be presented by Chris Crump, Senior Director of Sales and Marketing for Comrex. And our thanks to Chris for stepping in at the last minute to present what I know will be a great session. Also, a reminder to drop your business card into the registration desk area so you can be eligible for the door prize drawings, including the Sony next-gen TV set that does properly decrypt. And we'll be drawing winners just before our closing general session at 3:30 today, and you must be present to win. Thanks all for coming.